Welcome back to the deep dive. You know how we're all just drowning in information these days?
Yeah.
Well, you sent in this book asking the right questions, wanting to sharpen those critical thinking skills.
Right.
And I gotta say, it's a dense one.
Yeah.
But luckily,
Right.
we've got an expert here who can help us sift through it and find those golden nuggets of wisdom.
Absolutely. And it's not just about reading, is it? It's about becoming an active participant in everything we consume, from news articles to social media to those heated debates at family dinners.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so the book starts off by talking about two approaches to reading, the sponge and the filter.
Yeah.
I think I've been guilty of that sponge approach, just soaking it all up without really questioning anything. But in today's world, that's like drinking from a fire hose.
It really is. And that's where the filter comes in. It's about actively engaging with the material, asking those tough questions, and deciding what's worth keeping and what's just noise.
Right.
Especially now when everyone's claiming to be an expert,
Right.
Those filters are essential.
Like that whole debate around the recent tax cuts. Everyone's throwing around statistics.
Right.
But how do we know what to believe? The book had this interesting anecdote about a similar situation with the 1962 tax cut.
Oh, that's a classic example. At first glance, it seemed like a huge success, boosting the economy and all. But when you dig deeper, you realize the supposed decrease in government revenue was actually a significant increase.
Wow.
It just goes to show how easily we can be misled by a slick presentation,
Yeah.
even when it comes to numbers.
It's like those miracle weight loss ads. You see the before and after photos and you're like, wow.
Whoa, right.
But then you find out they photoshopped the pictures.
So, yeah.
Or the person lost weight through some other less glamorous method.
That's why this book is so valuable. It gives us a set of critical questions that we can apply to anything we read, watch, or listen to, and you don't need a PhD to use them.
So let's dive into those questions. The first one seems pretty basic. What are the issue and the conclusion?
It might seem basic, but it's crucial for setting the stage. We need to know what problem the author is addressing and what they're ultimately trying to convince us of. Think of it like figuring out the destination before you start a road trip.
Okay, so we've got our destination. Now we need to know how we're getting there, right?
Right.
So the next question is, what are the reasons?
What evidence or logic are they using to support their conclusion? Are they appealing to emotions, citing studies, telling personal anecdotes? Pay attention to those indicator words like because, since, for, and therefore. They're often signposts pointing to a reason.
But sometimes those reasons can be a bit slippery, right? Like they'll use words that sound convincing, but are actually quite vague. So the next question is, what words or phrases are ambiguous?
Yes, this is where we become word detectives. Watch out for words that wear many hats, words with multiple meanings or interpretations. Think of it like this. If you can swap out a word with another word, and the meaning changes drastically, that's a red flag.
Oh, I can see how that would be a problem. Like if someone says a policy will promote freedom,
Yeah.
but they don't specify what kind of freedom, that could mean anything.
Exactly.
Economic freedom, personal freedom, freedom to wear mismatched socks.
Those fuzzy words can be used to disguise weak arguments or manipulate our emotions. We need to pin those words down and clarify their meaning before we can assess the argument's validity.
And that's where those hidden assumptions come in, right?
God.
Which leads us to the next question. What are the value conflicts and assumptions?
Every argument rests on certain assumptions, things the author believes to be true without explicitly stating them. Often these are value-based. What does the author prioritize? Individual rights or collective good? Tradition or progress?
So it's like peeking behind the curtain to see what's driving their perspective. And sometimes those values are pretty different from our own, which can lead to those head-butting debates.
Exactly. It's not about saying one value is right or wrong, but recognizing those underlying values can help us understand why someone holds the opinions they do. It's like that classic debate about freedom of speech versus hate speech.
Oh, yeah.
Both sides are appealing to values, but they prioritize them differently.
It's fascinating to think about how much our values shape our interpretations of the world. And speaking of interpretations, the book also talks about definitional and descriptive assumptions, which seem even more subtle.
They can be tricky, but once you get the hang of it, they become easier to spot. Definitional assumptions are about how key terms are being defined. Remember that freedom example?
Right.
We need to know what kind of freedom they're talking about.
And descriptive assumptions are about how the author sees the world, what they believe is true about reality, even without providing hard evidence.
Exactly. The book uses this example of a study on handwriting analysis. The researchers assumed graphologists could accurately judge personality based on handwriting, but they never actually tested that assumption.
It's like saying all redheads have fiery tempers, without ever actually looking at any data to support that claim. Just because it's a commonly held belief doesn't make it true.
And that's where critical thinking comes in. We have to question those assumptions and ask, what evidence is there to support this? Or are there other possible explanations?
So let's say we've identified the assumptions, but the author is also presenting a bunch of evidence to support their claims. How do we know if it's any good? Which brings us to another critical question. What significant information is omitted?
Yes. This is where we play devil's advocate. What's missing from the picture? What evidence or perspectives are being left out? That might change our understanding.
It's like those infomercials that show all the amazing results people have had with a product, but they conveniently leave out all the people who didn't see any benefits or even experienced negative side effects.
Exactly. No argument is complete. And what's not said can be just as important as what is said. It's about recognizing that we're never getting the full story and being wary of those strategically placed gaps in information.
So we've looked at the claims, the reasons, the assumptions. But then there's that whole world of statistics, which can be incredibly misleading. The book actually uses the phrase, lies, damned lies, and statistics.
Oh, yeah.
Which leads us to another critical question. Are there flaws in the statistical reasoning?
Oh, there are almost always flaws in statistical reasoning. People can manipulate statistics in so many ways to fit their agenda. They'll cherry pick data, use misleading graphs, or play with averages to paint a certain picture. It's enough to make your head spin.
It's like those 9 out of 10 dentists recommend claims. Who are these dentists? Were they paid to endorse the product? Did they even exist?
We have to look beyond those dazzling numbers and ask ourselves, what's the context? What's the sample size? Are there any hidden biases in the way the data was collected or analyzed?
So we've tackled the evidence, the assumptions, the statistics, but there's one more critical question to ask, and this one seems like it could trip anyone up. Are there any errors in reasoning?
This is where we look for those logical fallacies. Those sneaky ways arguments can go wrong. Is the author attacking the person making the argument instead of the argument itself? Are they using emotional appeals or oversimplifications to distract us from the real issues?
It's like that classic ad hominem attack. You can't trust anything this politician says because they're a liar. Well, even liars can tell the truth sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. We have to separate the person from the argument and evaluate the reasoning itself. And the book provides some great examples of real-world arguments riddled with these fallacies. One that sticks out is the argument against pardoning Vietnam draft dodgers.
Oh, wait, I remember that one. It relied heavily on slippery slope arguments and emotional appeals, suggesting that pardoning draft dodgers would lead to chaos and undermine the military.
But when you strip away those emotional tactics, the core argument falls apart. It's a great example of how easily we can be swayed by faulty reasoning, especially when it's wrapped up in patriotic language or appeals to fear.
Okay, so we've gone through those key critical questions from asking the right questions. And I'm already feeling more empowered to be a critical reader and thinker.
And this is just the beginning. Remember, these questions aren't just for analyzing written texts. They're tools you can use to dissect anything you encounter.
Oh, wow.
News reports, political speeches, social media posts, even casual conversations.
It's like we've been given a superpower. We can now see through those deceptive arguments and spot those hidden agendas lurking beneath the surface.
And that's what makes critical thinking so exciting. It's not just about acquiring knowledge. It's about questioning everything and actively constructing our own understanding of the world.
I love that. It's like we're not just passive recipients of information anymore. We're active participants, shaping our own narratives and deciding what we believe.
Exactly. And the more we practice these skills, the more confident and discerning we become. It's like working out those mental muscles, making us more resilient to manipulation and better equipped to make sound judgments.
So we've got these critical questions in our toolkit, but there's still that nagging feeling of, okay, I've spotted the assumptions, now what? The book goes deeper into specific types of assumptions, especially value assumptions. I feel like those are the heart of so many disagreements.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is that the book provides like a handy table of common value conflicts that pop up all the time. It's like a cheat sheet for decoding arguments. You've got things like loyalty versus honesty, competition versus cooperation, freedom of the press versus national security.
And for each one, they give real-life examples of how these values might play out. Like, should you tell your boss about your coworker's mistake?
Yep.
Even if it means getting them in trouble.
Oh, yeah.
Should schools prioritize standardized testing or creativity? It's amazing how those values shape our positions on so many issues.
And what's important to remember is that none of these values are inherently good or bad. It's about how they're prioritized and applied in specific situations. Recognizing those priorities can help us understand where the author is coming from, even if we don't agree with them.
It's like that saying, walk a mile in their shoes. Understanding their values helps us see the world through their lens, even if it's just for a moment.
Exactly, and that can lead to more productive conversations, even if we don't end up agreeing.
Right.
We can at least understand why we disagree.
Okay, so we've got value assumptions down, but those definitional and descriptive assumptions are still swirling around in my head.
Okay.
How can we make them more concrete?
Let's try an example. Imagine we're reading an article about whether video games lead to violence.